New York City.
Yeah.
Just saying the name brings up this huge image, right? That skyline.
Absolutely iconic.
But it's so much more than just impressive buildings stacked together. It feels like a living history written in, well, brick and steel and glass.
That's a great way to put it.
And that's really what we're diving into today, this 400-year epic story of New York City architecture. We've got this really interesting YouTube podcast script as our source, taking us on a kind of visual journey.
From the very beginning right up to today's giants.
Exactly. Have you ever wondered why you can be walking down a street with centuries-old cobblestones and then bam, right there is this gleaming glass skyscraper?
Mm-hmm.
We're going to unpack that whole story.
And what's so fascinating, I think, is how each architectural phase in New York doesn't just, exist on its own. It's almost like it's talking to whatever came before it. Reflecting not just changing styles, but new technologies and really the ambitions of the people living there. That contrast you mentioned, that's a huge part of the conversation.
Okay, so let's go back. Way back. Colonial roots, New Amsterdam, 1624 to maybe 1820. What did things look like then? What were those first marks on the city?
Well, the Dutch influence is fundamental. You can see these visual echoes of Amsterdam, especially in the early stepped gable houses.
Stepped gables, like in Amsterdam.
Exactly like that. And it wasn't just looks. These tall, narrow houses made sense for the tight space in the early settlement, a very Dutch urban layout. Apparently, Pearl Street had quite a few.
Wow, imagine that. A little piece of 17th century Amsterdam right there. Then the British show up and things change.
Right. They bring their architectural tastes. The Georgian townhouse starts to dominate. Think symmetry, evenly spaced windows, that sense of classical order. Yeah. And a really important building that's still standing from that time is St. Paul's Chapel, built in 1766.
Still there.
Still there. Oldest church building in the city. A direct link back to that early British era.
That really grounds you, doesn't it? Wow. Thinking about how long it stood there. And speaking of history, there's that great little fact about Wall Street's name. It wasn't always Finance Central, was it?
Oh, not at all. The name is literal. It comes from an actual wooden wall.
No way.
Yeah, the Dutch built it to protect the settlement, mostly against the British, ironically. Mm-hmm. It's a very physical reminder of the city starting as this fortified trading post.
So the early buildings weren't just shelter. They were like a billboard showing who was in charge, what styles they brought over, a real reflection of its colonial start.
Precisely. You can read the city's early cultural and political story right there in the brickwork.
Okay, let's jump forward. Big jump. The Gilded Age, say 1870 to 1914. This feels like a total shift. The first skyscrapers start appearing. How did that even happen? What changed?
It was genuinely revolutionary.
Yeah.
Two massive technological leaps. Steel frame construction and, crucially, the elevator becoming common.
Right, steel frames. Stronger, lighter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Strong, but relatively light, allowing structures to go way higher than before. And, well, elevators made those upper floors actually usable, practical.
Sure, no one's walking up 20 flights.
Right. That combination just blew the lid off vertical building.
And they definitely ran with it. The Woolworth Building, finished 1913. They called it the Cathedral of Commerce. What's that about?
Oh, that nickname says so much. It wasn't just about height. It was a huge statement. Commerce and industry were the new gods, almost.
Huh.
Putting those Gothic-style spires on top of a modern steel frame, that wasn't accidental. It was borrowing the prestige, the grandeur of religious architecture to say, business is king now.
That's fascinating. And it wasn't only these giant office buildings, right? The rich were doing their own thing architecturally, too.
Oh, absolutely. The source calls it style wars among the wealthy.
Huh. Style wars.
Yeah, their huge mansions became these showcases for competing styles, like Beaux-Arts versus Neo-Gothic.
Okay, what's the difference there?
Beaux-Arts is very ornate, classical, lots of symmetry, very grand think. Roman temples meets French palaces. Neo-Gothic looks back to medieval times, pointed arches, intricate details, more vertical feeling.
Totally different vibes.
Completely. And building in one style or the other wasn't just about taste. It was a public announcement of your wealth, your status. Oh, and we can't forget Grand Central Terminal from this era, too. Mm-hmm. Monumental scale, real civic pride.
Right, right. So the Gilded Age, it's not just building up, it's building loud.
Yeah.
Making these big, bold statements with architecture, showing off industrial power and personal fortunes through these, well, sometimes wildly different styles.
Exactly. That's when the New York skyline really started reaching skyward, fueled by new tech and, frankly, a lot of ambition.
Okay, moving on. Art Deco and modernism, maybe 1920 to 1960. This sounds like a really stylish period.
Oh, it had tremendous energy. Art Deco, especially in the Roaring '20s, just oozed glamour and optimism.
Yeah.
Think geometric shapes, rich materials, those sleek, streamlined forms. What's amazing is that even during the Depression, that forward-looking design sense kind of kept going.
And the buildings from that time are just icons, aren't they? The Chrysler building, that shiny steel crown, Rockefeller Center with all the integrated art. What makes them so Art Deco?
Well, they really capture the style's essence, celebrating modern stuff like steel, giving this feeling of height and speed, and often using really detailed decoration inspired by like machines or even ancient Egypt sometimes.
Right.
The Chrysler crown, that's like giant hubcaps, a direct nod to cars. Rockefeller Center is maybe a bit different, more about combining the buildings, the art, the public plazas into one big unified idea.
It's wild that all this architectural flashiness was happening during such tough economic times. And then there's the Empire State Building. Its story is almost mythical.
The iconic survival story, yeah. Built incredibly fast. What was it, 410 days?
Unbelievable.
That speed alone was like this symbol of American grit. And then holding the world's tallest title for 40 years, that cemented it as this global landmark.
It really became, and maybe still is, the symbol of New York's, I don't know, its toughness and ambition. A beacon, even when things were bleak.
Precisely. A real monument to the city's ingenuity and just sheer determination.
Okay, now we get into a period with some pretty different architectural ideas. Brutalism to postmodern, say, 1960 to 2000. Brutalism first, what was that about?
Brutalism, popping up in the 60s, was a real swing away from decoration. It was all about using raw concrete béton brut, hence the name strong, blocky shapes, and really showing the building's function, its structure.
Okay.
The Met Brewer Museum is a prime example, that heavy, fortress-like concrete look. Some people find it, well, ugly, but the idea was this kind of honesty about materials and structure. Monumental, imposing.
Definitely a contrast to sleek glass or Art Deco details. And then in the 80s, postmodernism arrives as a kind of reaction. What changed?
Yeah, postmodernism was partly pushing back against what some saw as the coldness or the lack of history in modern architecture. It brought back decoration, historical references, sometimes really playful ones, and mixed things up more.
Right.
Philip Johnson's AT&T building, now the Sony building, is the textbook example. That top that looks like a Chippendale highboy made of pink granite.
Right. The broken pediment top.
Exactly. That was a deliberate thumbing of the nose at modernist seriousness. It was like architects suddenly felt okay reading the history books again, having a bit more fun.
It's fascinating how styles react to each other. And the script mentions that when the Twin Towers first went up, people weren't that impressed.
Yeah, it's funny to think about now, but initially, a lot of New Yorkers thought they were kind of boring, too big, too boxy. The source mentions the famous comparison to giant filing cabinets.
Filing cabinets.
It just shows how our feelings about buildings can change, right?
Right.
What seems stark or unwelcome at first can become really beloved later on.
So this whole period, 60s to 2000, it's this real back and forth. From the raw honesty of doodleism to the, I guess, more playful history-quoting postmodernism, a definite shift in thinking about what buildings should look like.
Absolutely. A time of questioning the rules, reevaluating what architecture was supposed to do or say.
Which leads us pretty much to now, the super tall era, 2001 onwards. It feels like the race upwards just keeps accelerating. What's driving this?
Well, several things. Engineering keeps getting better, material science too. We can physically build taller and, interestingly, much skinnier buildings than ever before.
Skinnier?
Yeah, these super slender towers. There's the economics, huge demand for luxury apartments with incredible views. And, there's still that basic ambition, pushing limits. The post-9/11 rebuilding was obviously a major factor too.
And One World Trade Center makes a very specific statement with its height, doesn't it?
It does. 1,776 feet. A very deliberate patriotic number referencing American independence. And then you have these other super talls, these really skinny luxury towers like 432 Park Avenue. Very minimalist, almost abstract grids reaching way up.
The source called its grid brutalist, but it looks different.
It does. Maybe a more refined, elegant take on a grid system than traditional brutalism. But you see the connection. They're dramatically reshaping the skyline again.
It's quite a contrast, these pencil-thin towers next to the older, bulkier forms, and it sounds like future ideas might even leave the ground entirely.
Right. The script mentions speculative ideas like floating parks. It just shows the constant brainstorming, the search for new ways to use space in a city as dense as New York.
So today's architecture in NYC is still pushing those boundaries height, engineering while also trying to meet modern needs and even dream up future possibilities.
It's a nonstop evolution. That's the nature of the city, really.
So, looking back over these, 4 centuries, it's so clear that New York's architecture isn't just background noise. It's this incredibly dynamic story. Ambition, crisis, rebuilding, reinvention.
Exactly right. And the fact that you can see all those layers, walk past a colonial church, then a Gilded Age mansion, then an Art Deco tower, then a super tall cog, it makes that history so tangible.
You can literally walk through the city's text line.
It really drives home that these buildings aren't just static objects. They are chapters in the city's ongoing autobiography.
A living, three-dimensional story.
Constantly being added to.
So maybe the next time you're walking around the city, really look up. Think about what future stories are being built right now, etched into that skyline. What are they going to tell people generations from now about our time?